Hello, welcome to Moral Philosophy Project 2. Remember, moral philosophy is about trying to answer the question about why we act the way that we do. You have conducted your own thought experiment concerning this regarding the Titanic, and you've gone through some scenarios where you've had to make moral decisions. Over the years, lots of philosophers have tried to answer this question, the question of why we act in certain ways. It's a very interesting question and a tricky question, particularly because human beings seem to be so selfish for such a lot of the time. Philosophers want to know whether we really can overcome that selfishness to consider other people from time to time, or whether even our altruism, that is, the things we do for other people, is actually all in our own self-interest. So as we go a little bit deeper into this, we're going to look at 4 different ideas about why we act the way we do. And then we're going to look at 2 people in particular and their ideas. So 4 different ideas about why we act the way we do. The first idea is that we act the way we do because we feel we ought to behave in a certain way. This is called our moral duty. There's something we ought to do or something we ought not to do. Perhaps we feel that we ought to always try and tell the truth. We feel it's our moral duty, even when sometimes the truth might get us into trouble. The second thing that might drive us to behave a certain way is the end result of acting that way, the consequences of our behaviour. That might be a punishment or something else. Sometimes we might get rewarded for our behaviour. Either way, it's the effect of the behaviour on me that drives the way that we actually act. If we're not thinking about ourselves, we can perhaps imagine what it might be like for other people if we behave a certain way. This is having sympathy for other people. Because we can imagine what it might be like to be someone else, we can imagine the effects of our actions on others. Finally, we might be driven to act a particular way through our conscience, that is, the inner voice or feeling that reminds us that we ought to be behaving in a certain way. This is sometimes, but not always, associated with God. 2 different thinkers about moral philosophy. 2 philosophers who have had a profound effect on our ideas are Thomas Hobbes and Immanuel Kant. That's Thomas Hobbes. He lived in the middle of the 1600s, around about the time of the English Civil War. He saw life at its worst and lots of terrible things during that period. That's Immanuel Kant. He lived around about a century later and was French. And he had some amazing ideas about the way we ought to behave. Kant thought that we should behave in a certain way because it's our right way to behave. It's our duty. That was the first of our 4 ideas. He believed that being guided by our self-interest, or selfishness, led to a problem, because if we let ourselves be guided by self-interest, eventually it'll conflict with other people's. He also believed that morality was absolute. In other words, there are rules about morality which apply for all people, in all places, at all times. But our feelings, which drive our self-interest, might change. So an absolute morality is a better thing to base our ideas about how we should behave on. For Kant, it was better to behave morally out of a sense of duty, and not necessarily be enthusiastic about it, rather than for our feelings of others. He felt that was the best way to behave. Thomas Hobbes, meanwhile, thought some different things. He thought that we're all basically selfish. He had a very dim view of human nature. He thought we will all act in our own self-interests as much as we possibly can. However, we realise that our self-interests won't always work to escape our nature. So the only way to do that is to cooperate along with others. So that led him to the idea that we all live according to a social contract. That is, we all agree to behave a certain way, not necessarily in some sort of formal decision, but there's a quiet agreement between people to behave a certain way, and we all automatically follow that way. That way, life and working with others seems to work. Well, you've heard 4 different ways that you think we might actually guide our behaviour. On the sheet that you've got, talk to 3 people and record which of the 4 ways they think is the best explanation for why we behave a certain way. Is it moral duty? Is it thinking about the consequences of what we do? Is it out of sympathy for other people? Or is it an inner voice or conscience that drives us? Then I want you to think about the 2 thinkers or philosophers we've been thinking about, Kant and Hobbes. First of all, I want you to think about what Kant would call moral absolutes. Can you write a list of things that are always right or always wrong, for all people at all times? Does any such rule exist? Then think about what Hobbes called the social contract, the sort of agreement that is kept between people to behave. Write down in the space provided any rules that you think it would be better if we all kept. They can be little rules like always picking up litter, or big rules like not murdering. Bring the sheet along with you to class next time. Thanks for listening.